All right, looks like someone got themselves into a spicy online debate. Tons of notes, comments, even a YouTube video landed in our inbox. And gotta say, I'm already intrigued. It seems like it all blew up over something called speedrunning. Ever heard of that?
Maybe not.
Right.
Everyone's gonna start somewhere, right? Basically, speedrunning is all about finishing a video game crazy fast. It's a mix of skill strategy, even using glitches sometimes to get those record times.
Wait, hold on. Glitches are allowed. I think that's cheating.
That's where those different categories come in. You've got any percent where anything goes. Then there's 100% got to complete the whole game, but still at warp speed. And of course, glitchless for those purists out there showing off pure skill.
Wow, I had no idea there were so many layers to it. So it's not just mashing buttons. It's like a whole strategic thing.
Exactly. It's a whole community these days. Massive events like Games Done Quick, speedrunners showing what they can do, and even raising money for charity at the same time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so speedrunning complex, competitive, charitable. Got it. But how did that turn into a full-blown online argument?
Well, your question got things going. You asked this YouTuber if speedrunning was politically motivated, and let's just say her response wasn't the most welcoming.
Oh yeah, I saw those comments. Words like clueless, ignorant, living in a bubble. Not exactly the best way to start a conversation.
True. And that's where it gets interesting. You asking about politics and speedrunning, it's actually a valid question, especially coming in without a lot of background. Maybe she saw it as you not even trying to understand, but even if she was frustrated, those words definitely didn't help things.
So a clash of communication styles from the start.
Could be. And remember, you also got that response from ChatGPT about speedrunning and politics. What'd you think about that?
Oh yeah, that was interesting. It basically said speedrunning itself isn't political, but it did say that politics can sometimes overlap with the community. Like some of those charities, Games Done Quick supports, they have politically charged missions, which can definitely cause some debate.
Right. Then there's that whole conversation about diversity and inclusion in the speedrunning community, which obviously ties into bigger societal issues. And even the games themselves can have political themes. Take Grand Theft Auto, for example. It's got mature themes and satire about American culture and politics. So discussions about speedrunning it might touch on those themes too.
So even though playing a game fast isn't political, the community, the discussions, the games themselves, they all exist in this bigger world where politics is kind of hard to avoid.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to separate the activity of speedrunning from any discussions that might come up around it. Just like any community, people in speedrunning can have all sorts of political views.
So speedrunning itself is neutral, but things can get a bit politically charged around it.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But how does all that connect back to your conversation with the YouTuber?
Well, it shows there might be more going on beneath the surface of that exchange. It's possible she's run into similar questions or criticisms before, maybe from people who actually were judging or putting down the speedrunning communities, so she might be more defensive or quick to assume the worst in your case because of that.
So past experiences and how speedrunning is seen by some people could have played a role in how she reacted to your question.
Definitely something to think about.
Okay, so we've got this whole backdrop of maybe some political stuff and past experiences that could be shaping how this YouTuber sees things. But let's zero in on what actually went wrong in the conversation. Didn't she say this wasn't the first time you'd interacted with her?
Right. You mentioned in the comments that you've had some back and forth on her channel before, and it seems like things haven't always been smooth sailing. She even said something about you asking questions you could have just Googled.
So maybe there was already some tension there, even before this whole speedrunning thing came up.
It's definitely possible. And that brings up a good point. Online interactions are rarely just isolated events. Our past experiences, good and bad, they kind of shape how we approach new conversations. Like we're carrying around this invisible baggage from those previous encounters.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If she's felt like you've dismissed her or talked down to her in the past, it's understandable why she might be on edge this time.
Exactly. And this is where things get even trickier. Even if we understand where she's coming from, it doesn't make those words okay. Clueless, ignorant, those are hurtful words that just shut down any chance of a real conversation.
Absolutely. And it's clear you felt attacked by those comments, which is totally valid. You pushed back, questioned her motives, and even brought up the last U.S. election. Was that even related to the speedrunning question, or was it more about all that tension from before?
Tough to say for sure without hearing her side of the story. But we can explore some possibilities. Maybe you brought up the election as a way to try and understand where she was coming from. Like you were trying to connect her perceived hostility to her political views. Or maybe by that point, the conversation had gone so far off the rails that it wasn't about speedrunning anymore. It was just about airing past grievances.
Either way, it sounds like a textbook example of how online communication can go wrong. You get caught up in that back and forth that need to defend yourself, and you lose sight of everything else.
Exactly. It's a struggle for everyone, me included. Especially on platforms like YouTube, those comment sections can turn into total war zones. We're so quick to judge, to assume the worst, to see everything as us versus them. It feels almost impossible to have a nuanced or good faith discussion sometimes.
It's like that saying, the internet is where nuance goes to die. It's easy to forget there's a real person on the other side of the screen with their own thoughts and feelings and experiences that shape how they communicate. So in this case, it sounds like both of you ended up feeling misunderstood, and it just spiraled into accusations and defensiveness.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that online communication is inherently flawed. We're missing those nonverbal cues you get in person. Facial expressions, tone of voice, those things help us understand each other's intentions. So it's crucial to be super careful with our words online. Avoid sarcasm or strong words that could easily be misinterpreted. And asking clarifying questions can really help. Trying to give the other person the benefit of the doubt whenever possible.
It's like we have to overcompensate for not being face-to-face by being extra careful and deliberate with our words online.
That's a great way to put it. And we have to be aware of our own biases, too. We all bring our own baggage to online conversations. Our experiences, beliefs, assumptions, all those things can affect how we see other people, especially those who see things differently than we do.
It's like we're all looking through these tinted glasses that distort our view of the world. And it's easy to forget that other people's glasses might have a different tint.
Perfect analogy. Sometimes those different tints clash, and it makes it almost impossible to find common ground.
So what can we do when that happens?
Yeah.
How do we avoid getting sucked into those negative spirals of misunderstanding and getting defensive?
Well, one of the most powerful tools is empathy. It's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment, to fire back a snarky comment or just dismiss someone's perspective as wrong. But if we can just pause, take a breath, and really try to understand where the other person is coming from, even if we disagree, it can completely change the whole conversation.
You're saying we need to step outside of ourselves and try to see things from their point of view, right?
Exactly. It's not always easy, especially when you feel hurt or attacked.
Yeah.
But it's a skill you can build with practice. And I think it's one of the most important skills for navigating the complexities of communicating online.
Okay, so empathy is key. But sometimes, even with the best intentions, conversations still go off the rails. What advice do you have for those situations?
Well, first off, remember, you don't have to engage with every single online interaction. You have the right to choose your battles. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to simply disengage.
Like knowing when to just walk away from the keyboard? Sometimes that feels like the hardest thing to do.
It can be incredibly difficult, especially when emotions are running high, but it's a crucial skill. And in this specific situation, given the history between you and the YouTuber and her saying she's done being nice to you, it might be best to respect that boundary.
So recognizing when a conversation is going nowhere and choosing to walk away is actually a form of self-care.
Absolutely. It's about protecting your own mental and emotional well-being. But walking away doesn't mean you ignore your feelings. Talk to a friend, write in a journal, do something to process those emotions in a healthy way. And remember, her words say more about her than they do about you.
Yeah, that's so true. It's easy to take those comments to heart and feel like they're about us.
Exactly. But they often say more about the other person and how they communicate than anything about you.
Right.
And if you keep finding yourself thinking about this whole thing, try focusing on things you can control, like how you communicate online, what communities you're part of, and the boundaries you set to protect yourself.
I love that.
It's a reminder that we have a choice in how we react to negativity online. We can engage, we can walk away, or even try to change the tone of the conversation.
Right.
And, bringing it back to speedrunning, it's interesting how speedrunning is all about control. It's about mastering the game, finding creative solutions, pushing the limits.
Wow, that's a cool connection.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a lesson there for how we approach online interactions too. Instead of feeling helpless or getting caught in the negativity, we can focus on what we can control, our actions, our words, and the communities we choose to be part of.
Exactly. And remember, you're not alone in this. We all struggle with the ups and downs of communicating online.
So true. Okay, before we wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to that question that started it all. Is speedrunning politically motivated?
Well, as we've seen, the answer isn't so simple. Speedrunning itself is about skill and strategy, pushing yourself to the limit. But like any community, it's part of a bigger social and political world. Discussions about charities, diversity, even the games themselves can sometimes overlap with political topics.
Right.
It's a reminder to separate the activity from the conversations around it. And that goes for pretty much everything we do online.
Absolutely.
And with that in mind, I want to leave you with this thought. How would you approach this conversation differently now, knowing what you know? And how can you use these insights in your own online interactions going forward?
Such a good question to think about. Because in the end, we get to choose how we show up online. We can choose to be respectful, have productive conversations, even when we disagree.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay aware out there in the wild world of the internet.